Hey class, welcome to our first video lecture of the year. I typically do this in all my other classes, slowly starting to trickle it into my economics classes, but kind of what these are is we're going to try and take the lecture out of the classroom so we can work together with the numbers in class. And this way, with these videos on Schoology, you guys can have these to study from and to kind of go back to whenever you need them. However, with these, we're going to treat them kind of as almost like outside readings. So along with watching these, typically the next day there may or may not be a kind of note quiz, all right? So if you take notes and you take good notes on these, you'll be able to use those notes if there is a note quiz the next day. If not, then you have the notes. But starting off with today, we're going to start talking about GDP. Now GDP stands for gross domestic product, and it's another one of those indicators that kind of tells us how well our economy is doing along with unemployment. All right, so let's get into it. What is gross domestic product? Okay, well, this is the definition. We kind of talked about this in class. It is the final market value of all goods and services produced domestically in 1 year at current market prices. I know that sounded like a mouthful, but we did break it down in class. Okay, so remember, that first part there, market value, it has to be a market transaction. It has to be bought in a store. It has to be a good or service that you buy somewhere, okay, with money, not black arms, gun sales in Arizona like we saw in the unemployment game, all right? That second part, final, okay, it's got to be a final sale. It can't be an intermediate good, meaning it can't be the nuts and bolts that make up a desk, right? It has to be the final sale. You don't buy every part in a new car. You buy the car, okay? The third one, produced, okay? Produced. Resale is not produced, okay? It's already been counted. If you go to a thrift store, right, those things have already been counted in GDP, okay? The fourth part there, we want to look at current market prices. That means that it's what's it valued at today, okay? We call that nominal, N-O-M-I-N-A-L, and that means not adjusted for inflation, okay? That fifth part, we want to look at goods and services, okay? Both goods and services. So if you pay for a maid service, then you're paying towards GDP. If you pay for a broom, then you're paying towards GDP, okay? 6, domestically, it's made in America, okay? Something that is made in China, that is bought with American money, it does not count towards our GDP. That would count towards China's GDP. And lastly, in 1 year, okay? It's an annual calculation. However, it's estimated quarterly. So every now and then in the news, depending on when it is, typically January, then in March, in the summer, in the fall, right? You might hear GDP projections, okay? And that's just kind of them saying that the economy is doing well, the economy is doing bad. If it's up, it's good. If it's down, the economy is bad, okay? So what makes GDP? We just talked about that. The 4 components. Okay, GDP is comprised of personal consumption expenditures. Now what that means is that whatever you buy, and personal consumption expenditures, that typically makes up about 60% of GDP. The other part is investment, okay, not typically put into banks, but business investments, right? So the fixed investment that businesses have in their companies, like they buy a factory, they buy tools, they invest in their product, that counts towards GDP. And also what they have in stock in their inventories. The next part is government spending, right? Now, all these categories are people spending things. Personal consumption, right? Individuals such as yourself spending things in stores. Investment, business spending things for their own companies. The government spending things on the government dime, all right? And the last part is called net exports. Now, that's our exports minus our imports. Okay, our exports minus our imports. So if we have a larger number of exports than imports, that's a good thing. However, if we have more imports, if we're bringing more things into the country or buying more European goods and not selling more American goods, then that's not going to be good. That's going to drive that number down, and which will cause GDP to go down. Okay, so if all 3 of these, C, I, and G, if everyone spends here, GDP will go up. Okay, net exports, if we have more exports than imports, GDP will go up. Okay, now these are all added together. You can see it in the equation down here. I like to call it GDP equals SIG NX, CIG NX. consumption, investment, government spending, and then our net exports. So what these mean is that consumption is spending by households on goods and services, all right? And this could be anything: cars, food, visits to the dentist, maid services again. 2/3 of GDP, about 66% of spending in the country. Investment by businesses, spending by businesses on machinery, factories, equipment, tools, construction of new buildings, whatever they need for their business. Okay, if they buy it for their business, then that would fall under the investment category. Government spending. Now, spending by all levels of government on goods and services. Now, this includes spending on the military, schools, and highways. So, every time Grays Lake buys new desks, like for our classroom, that would fall under the government spending category. Okay, that's not business investment, right? Because it's a public school, because it's paid for by tax dollars, then that falls under the government spending category. And then lastly, our net exports, our SIG-NX. Exports minus our imports. It's spending by people abroad on U.S. goods and services, like our exports, minus the spending by people in the U.S. on foreign goods and services, our imports. Okay. So here's an example here. In 2009, in trillions of U.S. dollars, you can see them down here, our GDP was roughly $14.45 trillion. Okay. So in our personal consumption, okay, individuals such as us, we spent $10 trillion. Okay. Businesses invested just about 1.7 trillion. The government spent close to $3 trillion, and then our exports were less than our imports. Okay, now that's going to drive GDP down because it will give us a negative number here, right? So really, whenever we're talking about GDP, it's kind of just a plug and chug. What's our consumer expenditures? What's business investing in? What's government spending? What's our exports and what's our imports, right? All these together give us this $14 trillion. Now, what this means and what we'll talk about is that the higher this number is, the higher this 14 trillion is, that's going to indicate the wealth and the really well off our economy is. Okay, if this number is lower and it keeps falling, then that means our economy is not doing well. But if it's rising and it keeps getting better, then that means our economy is doing fairly well. Okay, so I hope you guys learned some stuff from this one. I hope you guys enjoyed this. We're just going to keep these at a very basic level, and then in class tomorrow, there may or may not be a quiz, and then we'll get into some real applications and what GDP really means, so we can kind of work through that together. Okay, I hope you guys have a great rest of your evening, and we'll see you tomorrow.